Good evening. It's good to be with you. Welcome our visitors. It's always great to have our visitors swing by and spend a little bit of time with us worshiping. Hope everybody had a good afternoon, got some rest, or got some chores done, or just kind of vegged out. Whatever that may be, I hope you had a good afternoon. It was nice and peaceful for me. Our proof text tonight will come over from First Timothy chapter 6 and verses 9 and 10. When we look over there, we find that it says, "But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and harmful lusts, which draw men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness, and pierced themselves through with many sorrows." So I want to look at this. That it says that the desire to be rich fall into temptation and a snare. That's the trap. So we're going to talk about what people refer to as money traps. The what we think is what we're pursuing might be good or good for us or what we desire, but in reality, it's not. Money is more than cash as well. While we may be representing up here of what our society, the American currency, it can be anything of any monetary value. If you go back a few hundred years, we actually was a bartering society where we would trade not just money of value, but goods and services. So if a farmer grew a certain crop and that reaped plenty, he would probably take some of that portion and go and sell maybe for somebody who had seamstress or somebody who made cloth or whatnot, and trade those goods for those things. So just beware that while we may be referring to money, what we mean by money or cash tonight can mean anything of any monetary value. Money is a must in today's world. No person or institution can function without it. So we got to be honest there. It's something we cannot avoid. Even though it says it in the book and over here in First Timothy that it's the root of all kinds, it's not a root. A lot of people quote say, "Money's the root of all evil." It actually says it's the root of all kinds of evil. And even though it's the root of all kinds of evil, we still must deal with it in our everyday lives. We cannot avoid it. Money is what we let it to be. It can either be a treat, a necessity, or a trap. True for all, whether you be rich or poor. Just because you're rich does not mean that money's a trap. And it's given by God. Consider verse 14 there in First Timothy. But it's exploited by Satan. And so we're going to look at a few money traps here tonight that perhaps some of us fall victim to or may fall victim to in the future. And hopefully by looking at some of these, maybe we can be on the lookout and maybe we can avoid these traps in the future. The first one I want to consider here tonight is that when we the first trap I want to consider is that when we let money distort our sense of security. Again, when we let money distort our sense of security. And what do I mean by that? Is that happiness or a sense of belonging being tied to things or materialism. Instead of our happiness and sense of being tied to God or spiritual things, it's tied to homes. It's tied to automobiles. It's tied to the size of my bank account. It's tied to my career or whatever thing of this world that it might be. That's my sense of being, if you will. Now, I'm not saying that it's wrong to enjoy one's career. I'm not saying that it's wrong to enjoy the fruits of one's labor. That's not what we're trying to say. But uh, when that becomes the all in all, if you will, or you begin to set God aside in the pursuit of these things, that's when it becomes an issue. That's when it becomes a trap. And that's when Satan has you. We can look at some examples. We won't read, for the sake of time, we won't read about the rich young fool, uh, or the rich fool, if you will. But it's over in Luke chapter 12, verses 13 through 21. I'll paraphrase, but if you recall in this parable, there was a man who planted crops and he reaped bountifully of his crops. And he kept reaping and reaping. He reaped so much that he had to tear down one set of barns and build up another barn. And then once that was full, he built another barn. He just kept on building. And then down in verse 19, it says, "And I will say to my soul, soul, you have many goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry." That was his mindset. I've amassed enough fortune now. I can retire. I can eat. I can enjoy the fruits of my labor, or I can enjoy the things that I've worked so diligently for over these years. But there in verse 20, look at in the parable, it says, "But God said to him, fool," that's why it says the rich fool, "this night your soul will be required of you. Then whose will those things be which you have provided? So he who lays up treasures for himself and is not rich towards God." So there's the moral of that story. This guy was preoccupied with things of this world and enjoying the life here on this earth that he forgot about God. And when he thought he could relax and enjoy all that he had worked for or amassed, if you will, the fortune that he amassed, God came knocking on his door. And, or anytime one's life ends shortly, I don't think anybody really, for the most part, ever plans to die on a particular day. But for so many young people or people in your middle ages, or, at whatever point in your life it might be, they're not really prepared, are they? We should be. We should be prepared for any moment. For those who are not preoccupied with building up wealth in this world, they are prepared because they are rich spiritually, right? They have their focus on God, and then they are ready for when that time comes. But this guy he was not prepared whatsoever. And God even asked him the rhetorical question, you thought you were going to be able to enjoy all this. Now who's going to get to enjoy it? Because you're coming with me. So we don't want to make the mistake of the rich fool who he was preoccupied with things of this earth, and his happiness and sense of being was all tied up in his barns and all those things that he amassed. The next kind of similar is the Laodiceans. We see it in Revelation chapter 3 and verse 17. We see here, being paraphrased, or it's written by John, as they had this attitude. It says, "I am rich, having become wealthy, and have need for nothing, and do not know that you are wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked." Well, if they were wealthy and they had no need for anything here on earth, how could they be wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked? That's because they were spiritually wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked. Again, they were bragging that they had all that they needed here on earth. They had wealth, if you will. They had a distorted sense of security. They didn't have a need here on earth. But as being pointed out by Christ, your soul is in dire need because it's wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked because of where your priorities are. So we don't want to be like the Laodiceans. Their happiness and sense of well-being was caught up into material possessions as well. And ultimately, we see that the pursuit of these things, or making money the central point of your being, or your wellness, or your well-being, if you will, produces sorrow and greed, does it not? That again, 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 10 says, "For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness and pierced themselves through with many sorrows." Greediness and sorrows. This produces anxiety. People who live beyond their means when economic hard times falls upon the place of employment, instead of anxiety pursues, well, can I continue to keep my standard of life? Will I be able to keep my automobile? Will I be able to save face with the neighbors? Will I be able to stay in my subdivision? Whatever that case may be. Again, I think it can be argued that if we are living correctly, if we lose our job, or we lose anything here on this earth, it wouldn't cause us anxiety, would it? Because we would know that those things aren't necessary. God will provide, irregardless, if we're doing what we need to be doing. But for those that are consumed with materialism, it does. It creates great anxiety. It creates great angst. And that's certainly not a good thing. And then greed. Greed hurts others, does it not? The idea of greed is you're taking these resources and you're pulling them closer and closer, tighter, tighter, and not sharing, or you're taking it from somebody, or it's not the way that God intended, is it? Malachi chapter 3 verse 8 says, "Will a man rob God? Yet you have robbed me. But you say, in what way have we robbed you? In tithes and offerings." They didn't want to give up what they had, did they? They didn't want to give as they had been instructed to give. They didn't necessarily go to the synagogue and rob from the treasury of the temple. No, they didn't do that. That's what they were saying. Well, how? We haven't robbed the temple. We haven't touched the Lord's treasury. We haven't done. No. But when it came time for you to give as you have been instructed to give, you weren't honest in your giving. So yeah, you did rob. Your greediness to hold on to what you have is where you went wrong. James chapter 5 verses 1 through 5 says, "Come now, you rich, weep and howl for your miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches are corrupted, and your garments are moth eaten. Your gold and silver are corroded, and their corrosion will be a witness against you, and will eat your flesh like fire. You have heaped up treasures in the last days. Indeed, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, cry out, and the cries of the reapers have reached the ears of the Lord of Sabbath. You have lived on the earth in pleasure and luxury, You have fattened your hearts as in the days of slaughter. So here's the rebuke to the landowners or the producers or the business owners of our day. You know, here uh, these people are being rebuked for their greed because what? They weren't paying the wages that they were supposed to be paying. They probably, I'm going to read into it here a little bit, take a little luxury in reading into it. So, you know, indeed, the wages of the mowers who mowed your field, which you had kept back by fraud. In other words, they agreed upon a set price, but then when it came time to pay out, they did not. And I knew people like I know people like that, or I knew people in the military. If they would have a service done or whatnot, they purposely would go into the place and pick at it and complain about something in order to get the price reduced, and then they laugh going out the door. You see, I got it for 20% cheaper. You know, just that mindset. And like I shared with you this morning with contractors, that we dealt with all kinds of greedy contractors that had agreed to build and provide a certain product, but when it came time to deliver, they didn't they you know they didn't want to deliver. They didn't don't know exactly why. All I know for sure is that they did not live up to the end of their end of the contract. And often what they would say, like I say, they would say, they sue us, take us to court. We're not spending another dime on this project. That's how greed hurts others, when we don't own up to our responsibilities, or we do whatever we can to keep as much as what we have. I don't think there's anything as far as like when I went to Mexico, in Nogales, Mexico, there's no set. When you walk through the shops, there's no price tags. There's never any price tags on anything. The way their society or where their business model works is that you inquire about the price, they throw it out there, and then you haggle back and forth until you reach an agreement. And usually that first price that they throw out there is really, it's way out there, you know, and they like to go back and forth, if you will, on the price, and then eventually they'll settle on there. You'll reach a rock bottom price. It's usually about the time you're getting ready to walk out the door. You've probably seen that at a car lot. You know, oh, we can't. There's just no way we can meet that price. We can't. There's no way we can. We would be giving that car away if we did that. And about the time you get up and go to walk out, well, maybe we can beat that price. That's probably not the way. That's not the way a Christian should be living, is it? And obviously, those people that have businesses like that aren't Christians. Or yes should be yes, or no should be no. This is the price, and it should be a fair price. We should pay a fair wage. We should do a good job for the wages that we're receiving. That's the other side of this greediness. Is on the opposite side of the owner. There's the laborer who doesn't work the way he prescribed to work, and he pilfers and steals from the company, if you will, because he feels that he's not being paid fairly. Either side of that is greed, and it's certainly not the way that we ought to be. Money distorts our sense of security because we must tie security to the Lord and not things. Our sense of security should be in God and Jesus Christ, and not in our wallets, not in our bank accounts, not in our homes, not in anything here on this earth, not anything outside of the Godhead. There in verse 17 of 1 Timothy chapter 6, it says, command those who are rich in this present age not to be haughty, nor to trust in uncertain riches, but to the living God who gives us richly all things to enjoy. So what's he saying? Don't be greedy, and be generous. If you're rich, see, there's nothing wrong with being rich. Being rich in and of itself is not a sin. That's not a sin. It's what you do with those things. It's how you think of those things, and it's how you treat them in your mind. That's the danger. Things are uncertain. Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 and 20, it says, do not lay up for yourself treasures on earth, right? And that could be anything. That could be a job. That could be a person, a relationship. Again, it's not tied to just anything. I mean, just the money. But the reality of it is in this next phrase, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. The point is that anything here on earth is what? It's temporal. It's just here. It's just in existence temporarily, because everything that's on earth is eventually going to be destroyed, burned up. But lay for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust can destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. So there's an uncertainty about temporal things or material things or things of wealth as far as monetary things. Look at banks. Look at the vaults, the big monstrosities that they build in order to protect their resources. Look at what the Fort Knox, out in the middle of a field with nothing around it, protected by around the fence of an entire army installation where the largest tank regiment is. It protects the gold of not all the gold. Most of the gold, they say, is probably in New York, but nonetheless built to protect the gold of the United States. And even though it's in Fort Knox and it may be very, very difficult to break in and get to, it still can be broken into and gotten to. But while things on this earth may be uncertain, what we find is that the Lord is certain. Look at Philippians chapter 4, verses 12 through 13. It says, I know how to be abased, and I know how to abound. Everything and all things I have learned both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. I can do all things through Christ Jesus who strengthens me. Paul, and this ain't the only place that Paul points this out. Paul said, in times of good, I know how to enjoy those times of good. In times of bad, I know how to enjoy those times of bad. I get through it. I treat them both the same. Why? Because he did everything for the Lord. The Lord was his motivation. The Lord was his sense of being. He did everything for the Lord. Can we say that? If your savings was to be wiped out tonight through a computer error, can you say that your sense of being would be okay? That you wouldn't have the anxiety that we talked about a few slides back? Paul could. Paul wouldn't hesitate. Probably wouldn't even bat an eye. Can you say that? If you can't, perhaps your sense of security isn't where it needs to be. The next money trap that we want to consider here is that when we let money set our standard of living. When we let money set our standard of living. The reality is when we have a standard, it does what? It sets the tempo, right? That's what a standard is. Like when Bill could probably attest to this. I forget what that thing is that goes back and forth. Uh, Metronome, but that's to set the speed of the tempo, to set the speed of the song. Uh, that sets how the rest of the song is going to be. And so that's so a standard of living, a standard of whatever. It sets a vicious cycle, if you will. More money calls for a higher standard of living, does it not? Makes sense, right? The more resources that I have, the more that I can spend on a home, on a vehicle, on the clothes that I wear, on the food that I eat. And is there anything wrong with that? No, that in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with that. But it also, if you think of it in reverse, a higher standard, a higher standard calls also for 4 months. You see where the cycle begins? I strive to make more money or to get more resources so they can have I can have a better way of life, if you will, a a higher standard of living. But in reality, that higher standard also calls for what? More money, more resources to be going out. Uh, so when say so then we if we apply that with the idea of keeping up with the Joneses, because there's a lot of people that fall into that. I remember down in Georgia, there in the subdivision that I lived in. Now I was at the like had a nice house, but it was at the entry level of the subdivision, and there was these two guys. It seemed like uh, they both built really nice houses, but then one built a garage, and then another one built a garage that was a little bit bigger. Then the other guy, they found out he was building an extension onto the home for a home theater system. So that guy started modifying the upstairs of his garage and building out and over his pool to build him. And they just kept on building stuff. It, their houses, their property became almost like estates because there was multiple buildings on their property trying to keep up with one another. And the idea of keeping up with the Joneses, well, it drives our way of life because once we catch them, what happens usually with the Joneses? They go out and buy some more, right? And then we do what? Oh, I got to go buy some more because I can't let Fred Jones beat me, so I got to go get something a little bit better than Fred, and then so on and so on and so on. So same way with up here, this higher standard. Yeah. My standard increased, but then once we get there, are we content? Usually not. We want to go to the next level, and then to the next level, and then so then you're competing. Then the competitiveness for the job promotions, and so forth and so forth, sinks in. It's how it can drive our life. And then a standard costing much more than just money, or these standards do, or a standard of life, if you will. It often takes away from the family because what? You're working long hours, you're working maybe additional jobs. We see this in our society today. That used to be just the man in the house went out and then the wife stayed at home. If you go back to like the 1950s and 60s, now for the most part it's just about all dual. I meant should have looked up, seen what the actual percentage of families are dual income. But most households are dual income families nowadays. Multiple sources of income coming in. Price of goods keep on going up, and then the square footage of homes keeps going up too, and so forth and so forth. And if it's not multi income families, it's certainly multi job careers. You know, moonlighting, if you will, on the side. You know, working 9 to 5 here, then coming home, getting a quick bite to eat, and going to work another 4 or 5 hours over at job B, and so forth and so forth. When does it quit? When does it stop? When is enough enough? Titus 2:5 says to be discreet, chaste, homemakers, you know, as far as, you know, women in the family, good, obedient to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be blasphemed. Discreet, chaste homemakers. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with working. That's not the point. But what you know is this just so that I can have a higher standard of living? If it is, then what's our sense of being? And then what's driving, or what's really driving, you know, it's the vicious cycle. And then it starts taking away from our spiritual exercise, right? We don't have time to study. We don't have time to pray. I'm too tired. I had worked triple overtime this week. Not that I had to, but I volunteered to. You know, or work, you know, there's nothing wrong with going to college, but a lot of people work and go to college, you know. So where does it stop? Where does it stop? How much of that time, or how much of your day are you dedicating to the Lord? I don't think the Lord requires us to dedicate a certain portion of the day to Him. You know, you're not going to be able to flip through there and say, oh yeah, it says I'm supposed to give, you know, X hours to the Lord. It doesn't work like that. But when you wake up in the morning, when you start to purpose your day, is the first thought in your mind, okay, what do I need to do for the Lord today? Is that the first thought? Or is the first thought, what do I need to do in order to have all this? Do you see the problem? What's the true motivation behind what you do every day? And then time away from needing rest. We need rest. It's certain. Even God said, set aside a day for man to rest. Not that man needed, not that God needed it, but that man needed it. Set aside the Sabbath. Over in Matthew chapter 6, verse 31, it says, therefore do not worry, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? We aren't to be consumed about these things. These things aren't supposed to drive our lives. Our lives should be driven what? In service to the Lord, right? What can I do to further the kingdom today? That's what should be driving our instead of materialism. And the last one real quick here. The last trap that we want to look at is when we let money corrupt our view of success. When we let money corrupt our view of success. Often we spell success how? With dollar signs, right? It's how big, how much I got in my bank account. How much am I going to get in retirement? How much am I going to get in this? You know, how much it, you know, how, oh, my house is worth this much. Well, this is how much mine is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So often in society today, success is driven around what? Possessions. What you have, what you own. And the reality is that one can succeed or fail with much or little, whether rich or poor. Money has actually nothing to do with success, does it? It doesn't. But we think it does. We act like it does. For instance, rich people in the Bible that were successful. Abraham had a small army, an army big enough that he could go what? Over to a king and say, "Give me back my nephew." And look, and he's over, as far as the patriarchs of faith, he's recorded over in Hebrews chapter 11. He's the father of it all, and he was blessed with much. Or New Testament, Joseph of Arimathea. Anybody recall who he was? He was a rich guy that did what? He bought the tomb for Christ, right? And he also ensured that he got the body, so that when he came off the cross, in other words, he probably used his power and influence to pay the people who crucified Christ to give him the body so that it may be dealt with properly. And he didn't. Did he do that looking for repayment? Did he do that looking for accolades or anything? No. He just quietly gave it to the women and pressed on. People who were poor but yet very successful. Christ Jesus was the epitome, of what it was to have basically no material possessions. And then we talked about Paul earlier. Like I say, Paul pointed out over and over, whether times are good or whether times are bad, it's all good to me. As long as I have food, raiment, and clothing, I'm good to go. If you used to make a list of what you needed to be content, what would be on that list? Would it just consist of 3 things? Probably not. So again, for these people here, money had nothing to do with their success. Nothing to do whatsoever. But for the failures, for the rich fool and the rich young ruler, remember the rich young ruler when he says, "What must I do to be perfect?" Well, give away all that you have, and come follow me. And he did what? He went away weeping, right? Couldn't give it up. Where was his sense of being? Where was his sense of wellness? And then poor failures. Just because you're poor doesn't mean you're going to be successful either. Look at the poor thief there in Proverbs chapter 30, verse 9. Lest I be full and deny you and say, "Who is the Lord?" Or lest I be poor and steal, right? Just because you're poor, just because you don't have money, it doesn't give us a right to do what? Go out and sin and steal and rob and get things. And profane the name of God. Isn't that one of the modes of one of the political party? It seems to be, or at least that's the way some of the media perpetuates it. They seem to make excuses for people that they say that are poor, that they just can't help themselves but to break the law and do these things. No. Just because you're poor does not give you the right to sin. Never has, never it will. Real success is in what? Preparing for the afterlife, right? Preparing for the day of judgment. Preparing to hear, "Enter in, thou great and faithful servant." That's the ultimate success. That's what we all want to hear. That's why we're all sitting here, right? So that has nothing to do with this, does it? It has zero to do. It might have everything to do why we don't receive eternal life, but it has nothing to do with us receiving eternal life. I think there's a guy in the audience once told me I better get my priorities straight. That's true. If money and wealth or material possessions is your priority, then you've got a twisted sense of as far as spiritualness now, as far as receiving eternity on the other side of this world. It's I don't it, from what I read, it's not going to happen for you. And then we let money warp our sense of values. Money becomes our solution for most problems and needs. Giving becomes a means of buying respect, if you will. Philanthropy, people amass these great fortunes, and then they want to be what? They want to be in the headlines and saying, "Look at what he's doing. He's giving all this money to cancer and to all this and that, trying to feed the poor," or buying political influence. Yeah, that's donating, that's giving, but you're actually looking for something in return. Dollars become a substitute for deeds. It says, let them do good that they may be rich in good works, ready to give, willing to share. Let them do good and they be rich in good works, not in good giving, not in good check writing, but in good works. See, so many times we don't want to do the deeds, but we want to write a check and have somebody else do the deed, right? In the home, we want somebody else to do child rearing, or when it comes to hospitality, we don't want anybody to come into the home, but we will certainly pay to put them up into a hotel room. That type of thing. Or in the community, that send a check is a lot easier than to go and volunteer and actually help, the poor, the orphans, those who are in need. It's better to give to it's easier to give to a nonprofit than to actually go and do those things yourself. And in the church, we want to pay someone else to study, to teach, to sing for us. And that's really true in denominationalism, is it not? They pay for the biggest, grandiose, the best organ player or the best guitarist or the best singer. It's all about the entertainment. We need to not fall in that trap too and let it corrupt our sense of values. So as we wrap things up here tonight, if poor or prosperous, be content and thankful and be trusting in God. There's nothing wrong with being rich. There's nothing wrong with being blessed. There's nothing wrong with being poor either. We just need to be content and thankful toward the God for all that He's given us. We need to pray for wisdom to use what we have. We need to try to avoid the traps associated with money and materialism. And if we do that, I think we'll be doing well. Now we want to extend the invitation. The invitation is your opportunity. If you're here tonight and you're not a Christian and you would like to become a Christian tonight, to make that final step and to become a child of God, then we're here. If you're here tonight and you're already a Christian, perhaps you fell into some traps. Maybe it's money traps. Maybe it's some other type of snare or something that Satan set for you. Perhaps you'd like to call upon the prayers of the church or the congregation. Whatever that case may be, if you're subject to the gospel call in any shape, form, or manner, let it be known as we stand and sing the songs chosen. Verses 1 through 4.
just